out of such adab and mercy, he didn't even mention anything. He could have said, didn't you throw that stone at me? Didn't you? He knew the names. He knew the identities of those people. He let it go. And those people, even though in the beginning they were reluctant to come into Islam, they were reluctant. The narratives of the hadith say, by the next generation, those people, out of all the Arabs, were the most dedicated to Quran, the most dedicated to fighting for Islam. SubhanAllah, that generation, the people of Ta'if. So this is the Prophet's mercy even on the non-Muslims. And so SubhanAllah, when he went through this suffering, people knew that he wasn't supporting people because he wanted some gain for himself. He allowed when things would come in, when wealth would come into the Muslim Ummah, he would take it and he would distribute it. He would make sure that he never slept with a gold coin in his bank account, in his house. How many of us can say that every day we go to the ATM, pull out all of our money and give it all away before we sleep? The Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, النَّبِيُّ أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, that the Prophet has more right over the believers than they have over their own selves. So as much as you think you own yourself, the Rasul ﷺ has more right over you and has more respect and control over your affairs. So somebody might think, what does this mean? This means that the money in my pocket, he's going to take it? Of course you can. O Rasulullah, you can have anything you want, no problem. And he said, no, that's not the tafsir of the verse. The Prophet ﷺ said that this is the verse, and then he said, but when one of you dies, the money that you leave behind will go to his inheritors. I don't want your money. But if one of you dies and leaves behind debts and dependent children, that's on me. The Prophet ﷺ is saying, when he says he has more right over you, he's saying I have more right to take care of you than anybody else. You're on me. And so the Prophet ﷺ, this is the way he showed, to the point where his own enemies began to change because they kept on fighting against him. But the way that he would fight against them, he would of course defend with honor and dignity the Muslims. But when they realized, he would immediately accept their tawbah. To the point where even, subhanAllah, we know Wahshi, who killed Hamza, his dear uncle. His uncle that he grew up, an uncle of similar age. He was just a little bit older than him, so they grew up together like brothers. And Wahshi was the one who threw the spear to kill Hamza, years later, when Wahshi realized you cannot oppose the Muslims anymore, Islam is true and it's spreading, he came into the tent of the Prophet ﷺ wearing a lifam, wearing his cloth, covering his face. And he walked in, and the Prophet ﷺ allowed him to come in, and he said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And he took out the cloth from his face, and he saw it was the murderer of my own uncle. And the Prophet ﷺ just said one thing to him. He said, I accept that you become a Muslim, right? And he's forgiven of what he does, but please, can you just live on the outskirts of Medina? Because every time I see you, I get sad because I remember my uncle and what happened to him. That was the mercy of Rasulullah ﷺ, that even someone who had done something like this to him. When people came back at the end of his life, Amr ibn al-As, when he came to accept Islam after fighting against the Muslims, he, subhanAllah, he came and he went to put his hand in the hands of Rasulullah ﷺ to finally take his shahada. Last minute he pulled his hand up. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what's wrong? What happened? And he said, I just want to make sure that all my sins will be forgiven, because I have a lot of sins. He killed many Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ said, oh, don't you know that Islam wipes out everything that comes before it? And Amr ibn al-As said, there was no one before me, before this time, who was more hated to me than Muhammad ﷺ. And after that time, there was no one more beloved to me than Muhammad ﷺ. He says, I could not, after that, in the rest of my life, in his life, I could not even take a full look at him. I couldn't describe him to you. Because he says, the amount of love and respect that came into his heart, his former enemy could not even take a full look at Rasulullah ﷺ. He kept his eyes on the ground. And this is how the Prophet ﷺ would change those hearts. This is the mercy. And when the Prophet ﷺ, even Abu Sufyan, subhanAllah, even Abu Sufyan finally became a Muslim. When he finally became a Muslim. And subhanAllah, when they were marching back into Mecca, and finally, subhanAllah, I will sing these verses, inshallah, because we can't go through the whole thing. Marching into Mecca unopposed, the Muslims now were strong. When the pagans saw the Prophet, they knew that they had been wrong. For so long they had oppressed him, now they fear he would repay. But he said like Prophet Yusuf, there's no blame on you today. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he came back to Mecca, you know what he made Abu Sufyan do? He made Abu Sufyan sit on the top of a mountain pass. He asked Abbas, make him sit on the top of a mountain pass. So Abbas and Abu Sufyan, who just became Muslim, were sitting, and the whole Muslim army was marching past them in formation on the entrance to Mecca. And subhanAllah, as they were marching, Abu Sufyan was amazed that each tribe had its own squadron, in their own colors, their own flag. And he was saying, which flag is that? And they said, this is Banu so-and-so, the tribe of so-and-so. He said, they became Muslim? He said, yes. Then another tribe would march past. He said, which tribe is that? He said, that's a tribe of so-and-so. He said, they became Muslim too? And he said, yes. So after he's seeing all these Arabian tribes became Muslim, marching into Mecca, subhanAllah, finally he said to Abbas, he said, the kingdom of your nephew has grown really, really big and great. And Abbas said to him, oh Abu Sufyan, haven't you understood by now? This is not kingship, this is nubuwwah, this is prophethood. It brings light to people. It changes people's hearts. When the Ansari contingent was coming by, they were second to last. One of the chiefs of the Ansar looked at Abu Sufyan, and he still had a lot of hate in his heart. Of course, Abu Sufyan was the primary number one enemy of the Muslims. And he said to him, he said, Al-yawm yawm al-malhama, Al-yawm nastahillu al-Ka'bah. He said to Abu Sufyan, today is going to be a day, we're coming to Mecca, it's going to be a day of slaughter. Today we are going to take over the Kaaba. We're going to do things to violate the Kaaba. And Abu Sufyan, subhanAllah, he went to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, have you come to kill your people? The Prophet ﷺ said, and he rhymed it. He said, Al-yawm yawm al-marhama. He said, today is a day of mercy, not a day of slaughter. He said, Al-yawm yu'izzu Allahu Quraysh. He said, today Allah will honor the Quraysh. In another narration, today Allah will adorn the Kaaba. When Islam comes, it's not a scary thing for people. When Islam comes, it uplifts people, subhanAllah. As the idols at the Kaaba fell, he said, truth now appears. Ja'al haqq wa zahaqul batil. Inna al-batila kana zahuqa. And the falsehood has but perished, falsehood always disappears. Then the people came to truth just as the prophecy foretold. For Allah had sent Muhammad as a mercy to the world. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, alayhi salatullah. Now subhanAllah, as the Prophet ﷺ went through all these things, subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ, now that the Kaaba had become cleansed, the Prophet ﷺ was making his tawaf. There were still some people who had a little bit of hatred in their heart for the Prophet ﷺ. You know, there was one of them was Fudala. Fudala hid a dagger inside his clothes, and he said that, you know, the best way to kill the Prophet ﷺ and assassinate him would probably be when the Prophet ﷺ was absorbed in worship. So he waited for the time the Prophet ﷺ was in tawaf, and he came behind the Prophet ﷺ very quietly. And when he came near to the Prophet ﷺ to do the deed, the Prophet ﷺ immediately turned around. Because Allah put it in his heart that someone's about to do this. He turned around, not afraid, and he said, what's wrong, Fudala? And Fudala started to sputter. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him in another version, what are you saying inside your soul? Like the things that are going through your head. And he said, dhikr Allah. He said, adhkar Allah, I'm remembering Allah. The Prophet ﷺ, he smiled. And he put his hands on Fudala's chest. And he said, astaghfirullah, Fudala. He said, repent to Allah, Fudala. And Fudala, imagine the hate you have in your heart about to kill somebody. And Fudala must have been so tense when the Prophet's gentle hand went on his chest. He said, after a little while, the shock wore off. And he said, when the Prophet before the Prophet put his hand on his chest, he was the most hated person in the world. He said, when he lifted it up, he became the most beloved person in the world. Just the touch of Rasulullah was enough to change hate into love. To the point where Fudala ran away. He did this experience, amazing experience. He just left completely, ran out of the haram. And as he was passing by, there was a woman that he used to commit haram with, talk to. And as he passed by her house, she said, Fudala, why don't you come in and let's talk? And he went back he responded with such an amazing piece of poetry. He said, قَالَتْ هَلُمَّ إِلَى الْحَدِيثِ فَقُلْتُ لَا. يأبى عليك الله والإسلام لو ما رأيت محمدا وقبيله بالفتح يوم تكسر الأصنام لرأيت دين الله أضحى بينا والشرك يغشى وجهه الإغوان. Subhanallah. So he says, she said to me, come and let's talk. And I said, no, that Allah and Islam completely refuse you. And if you had only seen Muhammad and his tribe on the day of Fath, the conquest of Mecca, when the idols were smashed, you would see the deen of Allah becoming clear and bright, and shirk being covered over in its face with darkness. So this is how the Prophet ﷺ changed. One act of forgiveness, one touch would change a person's trajectory completely over. And don't think that that's gone from us today. Anyone who's in a problem today, anyone who's in sins or addictions or problems in their life, one tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change your entire trajectory. And this has happened many times and it will keep happening again, inshallah. We don't have so much time, inshallah, so what I will do is, rather than explain, I will just sing the last few verses, inshallah, of the Seerah song. But I need you all to help me. Okay? And here's how you can, okay, well, I'll sing this one and you can help me with the next one. Then he went back to Medina, living life with his Ansar. But the day was fast approaching that they all had thought was far. The Prophet ﷺ, when the Fath of Mecca happened, he surprised everyone. They thought he was going to stay in Mecca now. But out of loyalty to his Ansar, he came back to live with his Ansar. But the end of his life was coming very fast. First he told all his companions that this Hajj would be his last, to adhere to all the things that he had taught them in the past. The last year of the Prophet's life, he didn't tell them explicitly, but he kept on reminding them of what he taught them. And even during the Hajj, he would tell them. Then when seeing off a traveler, this last advice he gave: when you come next year, you might find just my masjid and my grave. When Mu'adh was sent to Yemen to be a judge, the Prophet ﷺ walked him out of Medina. You know, when you see somebody in a car, you see them off, you walk on the driveway, if you really love them, you might even